Okay, so welcome. This PowerPoint is on attachment and emotional development, and we're still looking at psychological development. So, it's really important to realize that in the first couple of months, babies form an attachment with the person who feeds them the most, who caters to their needs. And this attachment is very important. If it doesn't happen, it tends to affect you later on in life. So attachment is a relationship between two people in which each person feels strongly about the other. In infancy, attachment refers to the emotional bond which forms between an infant and another person. It's usually with the main caregivers, such as the mother and father. However, sometimes when other people are actually bringing up the child, it could be grandparents or siblings, they also form an attachment to them. So generally, infants under 6 months of age do not fully recognise their caregivers on an individual basis from visual cues alone. So essentially, they're willing to accept help from pretty much anybody, and that's why you can pretty much hold a baby up until 6 months and they won't care who you are. Between 6 and 8 months though, they start to work out who their parents are, who they can rely on to feed them, to change their diapers, to cater to their every needs, right? And they start to be discerning about who they actually want to take care of them. So it forms a special attachment to that main caregiver. So there is evidence that attachments formed during infancy does influence the individual's emotional development, both in the short term and into adulthood. So if something happens to that attachment, let's say for example, the mother or father leaves during that time, there is a good chance that a good attachment will not be formed. And that could lead to problems later on, especially with relationships. So the major researcher into attachment is a woman by the name of Mary Ainsworth. And she created what's known as the strange situation procedure. And it's very interesting, and I recommend that you go onto YouTube and have a look at it. I'll even put a link in to make sure that it works. I'll put it onto Microsoft Teams so you know what you're looking at. So what she did is she devised a method for assessing attachment in a laboratory setting. So the strange situation test, or the strange situation procedure, is a standardized test for measuring the attachment relationship a child has with their parents. So it's usually done between 9 and 18 months of age. Remember, at 6 months, before 6 months, they're willing to accept help or assistance from anybody. However, between 6 and 8, something happens which solidifies that attachment between a caregiver and the child. So the strange situation test happens after that attachment has been formed. So the infant and caregiver are taken into an unfamiliar room containing some age-appropriate toys. So what actually happens is the mother will be playing with the baby, and then all of a sudden somebody else will come into the room, and then the mother will leave, and we're trying to see what the baby does. If the baby happens to cry, then they've noticed, that the mother's left, and that's normal. Most babies will cry if their mother has left them. However, what Mary Ainsworth was looking for was what the baby did when they came back. So, if they happen to come back, or actually we've jumped the gun a bit, if they happen to come back and the baby is crying, and it stops immediately as soon as the mother comes back in, that says that there is a secure attachment. The baby felt that the mother was gone, and it was considerably happier when she returned. If they feel uncertain and anxious, so essentially when the mother comes back, they keep crying, they're a little bit fussy, they don't know what to do, right? This is usually marked by the kid, just sort of distancing themselves or keeps crying. They're said to be insecure. So they're unsure about what to do, and it's usually because the mother hasn't provided them with the support or the advice, and I'm being very sexist here, the mother or father has not given them the support they needed in the past, so they're now anxious. The last one is insecure avoidant attachment, and that's when the mother or father return and the baby actually cries, it wants to be picked up, but then when the mother picks it up, or father, it tends to actually, just sort of distance itself. It doesn't look at at the mother or father. It just sort of, if it's weird. I've seen babies do this, and it's like they're sad that their parents have returned. It's a weird reaction. So what I recommend you do is make sure that you have this particular graph and put it into your notes. It's very important because it does give a breakdown. So a secure attachment shows a balance between dependence and exploration. So when the mother is in the room, they tend to go off and explore, and they'll constantly check that the mother is there, but they feel comfortable in going out and playing with the toys on their own. They don't need the parents to look at them constantly. So they will show some distress, and we can see that there. So they show some distress and decreases exploration when the caregiver departs. And when the caregiver returns, the infant is enthusiastic and seeks physical contact with them. So they actually, they want to get up, they want to be hugged, they want to be held, right? And that's a secure attachment. That is very good. So if you have a look at this particular table, right, it does show what the characteristics are. It's not necessarily extremely important, but it is good to know. So as children, they're able to separate from the parents. So as adults, you tend to have trusting, lasting relationships. As children, you seek comfort from parents when frightened, and you tend to have good self-esteem as adults. As children, your return of parents is met with positive emotions, and you're comfortable sharing with friends and family and partners when you finally become an adult. And prefers parents to strangers, and usually leads to seeking out social support. Insecure avoidant attachment. So the infant does not seek closeness or contact with the caregiver and treats them much like a stranger. The infant rarely cries when the caregiver leaves the room and ignores the caregiver upon their return. So sometimes the baby won't even acknowledge that the parent is gone, and literally they do not care when they return either. So as children, they may avoid their parents, and as adults, it means they may have problems with intimacy. As children, they don't seek much contact or comfort from parents, and they invest little emotion in social and romantic relationships. They show little or no preference for parents over strangers. So in the strange situation test, they tend to actually interact more with a stranger when the mother leaves. And they're unwilling to share or unable to share thoughts and feelings with others. So avoiding attachment, yeah, it's a bit there. So resistant attachment. The infant appears anxious when their caregiver is near. They become very upset when separated from the caregiver. So you might notice these sort of kids when their parents are in the room with them, they constantly need to check that they're there. They constantly need to get approval. They need to be showing parents what they've done. They're constantly needing that reassurance. So they're very anxious when their parents are even there. And you can see in that photo there, even though the mother's picked him up, the kid just doesn't want anything to do with it. Wants to get down as soon as possible. And you usually notice this when a stranger picks up a child and the child does not want to be picked up. They literally will try to squirm out of your arms and try to get out of there. So when the caregiver returns, the infant approaches them, cries to be picked up, then squirms or fights to get free, as though it's not sure about what it really wants. This attachment type is thought to result from caregivers who are not very responsive to the infant's needs. It is assumed that the infant feels they cannot depend on their caregiver to be available to them if needed. Alright, ambivalent and the resistance one are very similar. They may be very wary of strangers, so as adults they're reluctant to become close to others, so they don't form good intimate relationships. They become greatly distressed when the parent leaves, and then when they actually do come back though, they're not comforted by them, so it's really weird. They worry that their partner does not love them and become distraught when the relationship ends. It's as if life is over as they know it, even though they weren't particularly invested in the relationship to begin with. So, the 3 types of attachment behavior. Right, most people are secure attachment, which is good, we need that, but we do have quite a lot of avoidant, so 22%, and resistant is 12%. So, factors influencing attachment. Bowlby argued that all infants have an inborn primary drive to form an attachment with a caregiver. So the bond forms the formation for healthy emotional development later in life. So if you don't have a good relationship as a child, you're not going to have a good relationship as an adult. And remember, I keep telling you about the fact that you can learn, you do the most amount of learning in your early first 3 to 5 years of life. Same with attachments. If you don't have a good attachment as a child, it's going to cause issues with relationships and attachments later on in adulthood, even in your teen years. And it can be quite problematic, especially in relationships. So the bond has an evolutionary function, which according to Bowlby improves the infant's chances of survival. So if it happens to bond with somebody, it's going to, it's going to make them more likely to respond when that child cries. So Bowlby suggests that infants use genetically inherited abilities. So I'm just going to highlight that for a second. So genetically inherited abilities such as crying, smiling, gazing, vocalizing, and clinging to get near to their main caregiver, or to get their caregiver's attention. Bowlby also proposed that mothers are the best caregivers for infants. He believed that nature intended the mother to be the primary caregiver. Yeah, look, sexist on all kinds of scales. You've got to remember this is in 1969, so the whole idea that the mother should stay at home and look after the child is now currently being thrown out the window. Some people still believe it, however, you need to take it with a grain of salt. Alright, so from a genetic standpoint, we have a need, a primary drive to actually form an attachment. So genetics make us form an attachment. Temperament can also influence attachment. So the caregiver plays an important part in the emergence of attachment, but the type of attachment formed also depends on the extent of the infant's behavioural characteristics. Most definitions refer to temperament as our characteristic way of reacting to people, objects, and events. So there's 3 types of temperaments observed in infants. Easy, even-tempered. So these are the kind of babies that are so easygoing. You can pretty much do anything with them and they'll be fine. Sorry. Difficult, right? These kids, no matter what you do, you cannot get them to settle. They have trouble sleeping, feeding is difficult, and even the slightest little thing will set them off. And then you have the last one, slow to warm up. So these people or these babies tend to be the kind of babies that when you see them, they're not very interactive. They tend to be inactive, and then once they get to know you, they just come out of their shell. And you usually see this with shy kids, right? Slow to warm up, they're really shy at first, but eventually when you crack through that layer, they do warm up to you. And this happens quite a lot when we're looking at temperament in influencing attachment. You're going to have a better attachment with easy and even-tempered kids. With difficult kids, even the parents struggle to form an attachment. They still love them, not saying that, but they struggle to form a very strong attachment because of the fact that they are difficult. Another factor that influences attachment is early life experiences. I keep telling you again and again and again, you need to have as many life experiences as possible and expose kids to them as early as possible. So attachments usually form within the first 6 to 7 months or so. Therefore, the infant's experiences during this period are important. So you need to constantly be around your child. And that's why they were advocating that, there should be a stay-at-home parent sort of deal. So then that way their attachment is formed and the parent is able to take them on experiences and do all that sort of stuff with them. So the sensitivity and responsiveness of the caregiver are vital aspects of early life experiences and play an important role in the type and strength of attachment which occurs with an infant. So if they have a child and, they're caring for them whenever they cry, they feed them, they burp them, they do whatever they do with babies, right? They're making sure that they're being catered for, and that really forms an attachment. There is a fourth attachment type. So an insecure, disorganized attachment. Infants are often inconsistent or showed contradictory behaviors when separated or reunited with their caregivers. For example, when reunited with a caregiver, they might seek close contact, but would do so by moving slowly back towards the caregiver or approach with their head turned another direction as avoiding eye contact. These infants also tended to respond to reunions with fearful, odd behaviors such as rocking themselves, ear pulling, or freezing. And now there's even been some research into these kind of kids, so insecure, disorganized attachment, and they're trying to correlate that particular attachment type with Asperger's. And there's quite a lot of research that does support this kind of behavior, and there are some similarities. So think of it this way. You go see a kid, a little baby, and they're walking towards you, but they have their head down as if they don't want to go see you, but they're coming to see you anyway. Alright, and that is it. I will put the link on Microsoft Teams and on Compass. The 5th logbook, which is on Harlow's attachment in monkeys, you'll need to look at that and watch the videos. They are about little monkeys, but they are trying to scare them. Sorry about that. Please complete the activities that are outlined below. Please make sure you're doing the work. This is your future. Please make sure you do it. So there's some links there, but I'll do the proper one online as well.